Okay, good afternoon all, and warm welcome to the Planning Committee, literally. So anyway, the first item on our agenda is any apologies for absence?
I've had none yet.
None?
Yeah.
Thank you. Second item then, are there any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests from committee? No? No, thank you. The third item is to approve and sign the minutes of the previous meeting as the correct record, and you'll find that on pages 1 and 2. So I'm on page 1 now. And then page 2. Somebody move that. Thank you. There's a true record. Thank you very much. Item 4. Are there any items for deferral or withdrawal? No, Chair. No. Thank you. And then we move on to item 5, which is the determination of planning applications under the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990. And the first item on our agenda is item 1 you find on page 6, and that's at Trashland Road. Over to you, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prananda. Okay, this application has been called to committee at the request of the local member and following an objection threshold being met. So it's an application for full planning permission for the retention of a 5G telecoms installation consisting of a 12-metre high street pole and equipment cabinets on a grass verge on Trashland Road, which is in the ward of Llansamlet. So the monopole and equipment are finished in light grey colour. So this slide shows the approximate location of the site in the context of the wider Swansea surroundings. Next slide, please. This slide is the counterpart aerial image, so it shows the location of the site. You can see it's in an urban area, and based on the types of buildings, you can see it's in a mixture of commercial and residential uses. Next slide, please. So this is the more detailed site location plan, where the site is identified on a grass verge along the main road. The adjacent junction is to the south of the site and provides access to various commercial units, to include Lidl, Iceland, the Range and the car wash. So residential properties are on the opposite side of the road, and they mainly are bungalows, but there are two-storey properties further away, including those on Lone Envis to the north. Next slide, please, Ian. So this is the site location, site block plan, which shows the mast and cabinets laid out on the grass verge. The mast is to the northeast, and then there's a small gap before the cabinets, which are grouped to the southwest. Next slide, please. So here's the elevation plan. As you can see from Trashland Road, the mast, inclusive of the antennas, reaches a maximum height of 20 metres. The smaller cabinets are shown alongside, and the plan also refers to different heights of street lamps and the covered roof of the adjacent car wash. Next slide, please. So this is a photograph showing the site when viewed on the opposite side of Trashland Road, which contains residential properties. So this is taken before the mast and equipment was installed. Next slide, please. But as this being a retrospective application, I am able to show you photographs of the development as installed and are considered in conjunction with the submitted plans. So here's a collection of images showing the equipment cabinets as installed on the grass verge. There appears to be a camera fitted to the lower section of the monopole, which is most likely fitted as a response to graffiti to the telecommunications following its installation. So you can see these in the photographs. Whilst the camera is not strictly identified on the submitted plans, it has been considered as part of the application submission, and all equipment have been finished in light grey. Next slide, please. So here's a photograph of the development when viewed from the opposite side of Trashland Road, which contains residential properties. From this perspective, the mast is seen in with the commercial buildings in the backdrop. It is also seen in context with other vertical structures such as lampposts and trees. Next slide, please. So this photograph is taken from Trashland Road, looking in a southwesterly direction. Residential properties are on the left, and the mast and the commercial units are on the right. The photograph highlights the wide nature of the road and how the mat sits within the typical street scene. So please note that the Lidl store, that behind that there are tall high voltage pylons. Next slide, please. So this view is taken from the grass verge alongside the mast, but adjacent to the car wash. It looks towards Trutland Road, and you can see the residential properties on the opposite side. Next slide, please. So this view is taken from the car park of Lidl's, with a car wash being on the left-hand side. The mast is located about centre left there in the photograph. The bungalows on the opposite side of Trutland Road are in the backdrop, and two tall high voltage pylons are also visible in the photograph. Next slide, please. So this photograph is taken near the outer curtilage of Lidl, alongside the junction joining Trutland Road. Next slide, please. So these two photographs are taken from the junction with the commercial units, from the lane emerging onto Trutland Road, looking left and looking right. The left photo shows the mast and the cabinets, and the right photo looks in the opposite direction down Trutland Road. Next slide, please. The final photo looks northeast up Trutland Road this time, and the mast and cabinets are visible centre left and show both the commercial and residential street scene context. This shows the numerous vertical structures such as streetlights, trees and high voltage pylons being available and visible in the street scene. Next slide, please. So the background history relating to this submission has been set out in the report before you today. And in summary, earlier this year, an application for a prior approval for a 20-metre high mast and cabinets on the same grass verge, but approximately 12 metres to the northeast of the site, was considered and approved by the local authority. The submission was deemed acceptable in terms of its siting and appearance and satisfied the relevant permitted development rights. So that all happened about 10-12 metres away from this site. And in most circumstances, a mast of up to 25 metres in height is permitted development. The mast and cabinets which have been erected on site and are the subject of this application are sited closer to the junction with the commercial units, as I've shown you in the photographs. Permitted development rights do not apply in circumstances where the development has already occurred, and as such, planning permission is required, and that's what's prompted the application that's before you today. So the agent for the application has also confirmed that the current application represents the only telecommunications equipment to be erected, and the development approved by the earlier application this year won't be actioned. So whilst permitted development rights do not apply in this instance, it is, however, material to have regard to the similarities between this latest submission and the earlier approval on this for a similar development on the nearby site, where comparable attributes apply, such as the scale, the nature, and the relationship of the development with the character and appearance and context of the site. So the report before you today has carefully considered the impact of the development upon various planning considerations, and in particular against policy EU5 of the LDP, which specifically deals with telecommunications infrastructure. So in terms of visual amenity, it's noted that there are a number of vertical features in the immediate area, and I've highlighted some within this presentation, and they include tall electricity pylons. The spatial character of the area comprises a wide road in a busy area, alongside shops, car wash and several residential properties. The telecommunications equipment is sited on the opposite side of the road of the residential properties and is viewed more towards the commercial context rather than the residential context. It does have a localised visual impact, being primarily visible along the section of Trutland Road and minor streets. It's finished in light grey. There is a prevalence of grey tones in the area, and I hope the photographs help you to picture, have a good idea of the surroundings. There are also other street cabinets in the street scene already prior to this development being installed, but perhaps not the mast, obviously. The site is not in a sensitive area, it's not in a conservation area, it's not in a special landscape area, there are no listed buildings or scheduled monuments nearby. So the report has considered everything and conclude that this urban area can accommodate the development without unacceptable impacts on visual amenity. The purpose of the development is to provide effective signal coverage for the area, and as such, the siting of the development is geographically constrained and restricted by various operational and technical factors. So the application includes information relating to alternative sites that have been considered but then discounted. and these have been referred in the report. Whilst the justification for each discounted site is a bit limited, we acknowledge that, it is considered that the development in its chosen location is acceptable and reasonably justifies under planning policy. And as I mentioned, we do have regard to the earlier approval made by the authority for a very similar development only a few metres away. In terms of amenity, the development is sited along commercial units and on the opposite side of the road to the nearest residential properties. The nearest residential properties is approximately 30 metres away, and it is separated by the wide road. Having regards to this and the slim nature of the structure and the wide roads and the colour of the finish, we believe that the circumstances of this site does not result in any harmful impact on residential amenity of neighbouring properties. And again, we refer to the similar relationship that the earlier approval would have had with residential properties as well. I did mention at the start that there was a camera fitted to the lower part of the pole, which is about 30 metres away from the nearest residential property. And at that distance, we consider it doesn't unreasonably affect privacy. But we also acknowledge that there are other legislation in place which deals with privacy and things like data protection as well. So the report has explained health matters in detail, which can often crop up as part of dealing with mast and telecommunication. And this has been covered quite well in the report, but the applicant has submitted a statement that the equipment and the installation is designed to be in full compliance with the requirements of the radio frequency public exposure guidelines. And these are set nationally, so this mast does comply with that. And it complies with current planning policy and guidelines. Various photographs of the development in context to neighbouring roads and paths have been shown in the presentation, and the Highways Authority raised no objection and does not consider it raise any significant detriment to highway and pedestrian safety. There is a 33 signature petition objecting to the scheme and 11 individual letters of objection. These include matters relating to visual and residential amenity, highway and public safety, lack of consultation and lack of justification for its need, together with various technical matters. All these matters have been summarised and addressed in the report before you today, and some of which I've covered already in this presentation. So in conclusion, the report considers that the development is on balance is acceptable and does not result in any significant effects on the wider area or raise any overriding public amenity or safety concerns. Weight is also afforded to the earlier decision that I mentioned to the authority on a similar development on a very nearby site. We've also given weight to the need of the installation to enhance the technology and the telecommunications in the area, and the social and economic benefits that this will bring to the locality. It reasonably complies and satisfies planning policy and guidelines. There are conditions listed in the report, and one of those conditions requires the removal of the telecommunications equipment as soon as practical when the telecommunications no longer is required to broadcast or to emit the signal. And then the land would be restored to its former condition before it took place. And this type of condition would be in line with national guidelines. So the recommendation is to approve with conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I got first off, we got two speakers and then followed by the 4 ward members. Call them in order. Got Janet Lovell first. Janet, got your. Thank you.
Hello. I have another objection here. It's from a resident who tried to submit her online objection twice and it failed to submit. The mast doesn't fit in with the aesthetic appearance of the area. It towers over the properties in the surrounding area, for example, the bungalows and car wash, and it's a blight on the landscape. And it wouldn't submit. And this is from Mrs. Jan Wells, 23 Lauren, First Swansea. The notice that went up yesterday inviting the public to phone in if they wanted to speak, that was only up a few hours, and in any case the phone number on it was an invalid phone number because somebody did try to ring it. Respectively, with respect, I'd like to remind the committee that there was a consultation took place in April of this year, and we were 7 days into that consultation. People were submitting objections when the mast was put up illegally at 10 o'clock in the night. Now, some of those people are not on social media. I haven't been able to be proactive in contacting people because I was in hospital for 4 days with an infection and I had to have IV antibiotics. And the communication, has broken down. Lots of people are not on they're not on Facebook and social media. And I just wasn't well enough to sort of get in touch with people to let them know. I mean, I did Investors in People, and it's about, where there's information, you must let everybody know. With regard to the health and safety concerns, I know you can't reject on health grounds. I would just like to say, though, that you were going by the ICNIRP standard, which has been subject to a lot of criticism because they are frontmen for the industry, and their test is based on, it's not even based on a 5G phone or even an Android phone, and it's a phone the size of the brick held that far away from the head of a specific absorption mannequin, because it can't test radiation on human beings because it's unethical. This is based on the size of your average 6-foot marine, where there are children, women, smaller men using phones. Obviously, there's more of an absorption of radiation. I think, from what I've heard from the people I know that live in Birchgrove, their signal has not improved with the 5G mast. That is a myth. And people who work for the telecoms installing these, like I know somebody works for U Fibre, another one for EE, and they say the same. I would like you to consider our objections, and the fact of that the bone of contention was that there was no consultation, and when we did have one in April, that happened, and it was very bad for morale for the people in the area. And I am asking the panel to take those objections that were done back then into account, because there was far more objections done then, and the same people, but things have changed. We're not all in the same Facebook group anymore. Some of these people are not even on social media anyway. So and with regard to the mast being 20 metres high, and you say 25 metres is okay. Well, there is still a law from 1985 that says it shouldn't be more than 15 metres. But I'm not here to argue that, because I'm here doing objections, because I don't want it to have planning approval. We would like it moved. And I speak on behalf of the residents. And there's a lady that can't be here today who is housebound, who lives directly across the road, and it is affecting her psychologically, having to look at that thing all the time. On those slides, you can't really appreciate when you're actually there. The mast is much closer to the houses than what it appears on there. Same with the car wash. You're given, like, it's not really, you're saying the view from Trackline Road, the view from southwest, it looks as if it's a much bigger area than it actually is when you're there. It can be deceiving, which is why I was disappointed that the planning committee weren't going to come and visit the site. And then you may have had, more residents come out just to, not to say anything to you, but just a show of support for, the objections. So, right, I'll leave it, because I know we haven't got much time, and Robert wants to speak.
Yes, thank you very much. And yes, Mr. Allender, thank you. Over to you.
Hello, yes. My name's Robert Allender, and I live at 50 Trafflin Road. I speak for the residents, myself, Barbara Smith and Roger Watch, who live exactly opposite this mast. The mast in question, slimline, is not a slimline pole. It's a very thick pole, shown by a close proximity to the existing streetlight pole, which is slimline. The streetlight pole is approximately 7 metres round for approximately 5 metres, and then tapers to a narrow pole. The 5G mast is 25 metres around and for approximately 40% of its length, and it tapers to still a substantial solid pole. Also, associated box with the graffiti "No 5G," which indicates the pole owners have hardly ever taken notice, if they indeed have ever visited the site. This mast is ugly and a considerable eyesore as the mast dominates the skyline far and wide and appears more than 20 metres high. It's only approximately 20 metres away, which is outside the industry's own guidelines. Also, due to its excessive height, is it visible not only from our houses, but also short, mid and long range, and by people walking back and to and from the local shops. It does not enhance the character of the area, cited as it is on the glass verge. It is considered this unreasonableness impact is not justified by any technical need or the details of the particular site. There will never be any houses built behind our houses because it's all coal mine working built prior to the National Coal Board, so nobody knows where the actual galleries are. So that will never happen. On the other side is a car park. Now there's Lidl's and the range, and the people go to these places to do shopping. They get the shopping and they go home. They've got no interest in this 5G mast. They don't go to, they will go to the car park because I can get a 5G signal. They go to actually shop, get their shopping and go home. And so this, why this mast is where it is a puzzle to us, because the bungalows are all cabled, and the cables can deliver broadband faster than a 5G mast will ever do. And those particular things, and in policy terms, this should be either sited, designed or landscaped to minimise any negative impact on the built or national environment, and this proposal does not achieve these requirements. The design, site and appearance of the pole is unacceptable, as it does not comment on the number of aerials this pole will have, but more aerials will make the pole even more of an eyesore. Also, the camera, well, I don't know. It hasn't got any planning permission. Why it's pointing towards us, we don't know. We don't know anything of what the coverage is. But I myself, Barbara Smith and Roger Watts accumulated 51 signatures, including residents of Trafflin Road, Lon Enfys, Carmel Road, and people who drive past it. And also Mr. Clegg was the car sales at the rear of the pole, and he is nearer than the pole than anyone. We understand that less sensitive sites exist as 5G pole can be installed, and it should be removed immediately. And not sited near any houses on Frederick Place, Trafflin Road, Lon Enfys or Carmel Road area. And that's and also the impact of the 5G should have a negative impact on the value of property. And we also deplore the way it was erected on Wednesday, the 5th of April, under cover of darkness at night time in the rain, disturbing the peace for up to approximately 11 p.m. I mean, as far as the gentleman who opened the debate is concerned, would he like somebody to come along and do some work about in front of his house at 11 o'clock at night? Anyway, I rest my case.
Thank you very much. I've got the 4 ward members. Councillor Jones first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, committee. I'd like to thank Mr. Allender and Mrs. Lovell for coming today, and other residents of the Llansamnet ward. I think, as you can appreciate, it is a hot topic, and rightly so. I'm not against telecom infrastructure. We need it to develop within the country. What I am against is what they've done here with regards to initial planning permission. They've turned up. They haven't done their due diligence when it's come to services where they're going to put the mast and the infrastructure. But they know they've got permitted development rights, so they ride roughshod over their permitted development and think it's acceptable to put it in a different position and expect permission after it. I think you can sense the feeling here today with regards to the 5G mast in Llansamnet, and especially in Trafflin. As I said, I'm not against telecom infrastructure, but to say it fits in with the current skyline and the current street furniture, as Mrs. Lovell said, you need to go to the area to appreciate the 20 meter, full 20 meters of the mast, and we don't even know if it's 20 meters because I did ask for it to be measured, and due to technical difficulties, it couldn't be done. You only need to be there to see how it doesn't blend in with the skyline. It doesn't blend in with the retail units there, and you know, as Mr. Allender said, you know, there's residents here today that have got to walk out of their front doors and look at that every single time and out of their windows, and it's not a good look. I can assure you these things do not fit in residential areas. They do not blend into residential areas. It doesn't matter what colour they are. Okay, it just doesn't work. There's sites listed here that they say weren't acceptable. I propose that there were different sites again that were available where they could have put the mast. And I'll pass over to my colleagues for further comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I got Councillor Doyle. Thank you.
I use my microphone on. Right. I think this comes under one of those issues in planning that isn't recognised in planning law, but it comes very much under the sort of common sense issues with planning of, would you like one in your street opposite your house? And I don't think there's any person in this room who would volunteer to have one of these as close to their house as Mr. Allender and his neighbours does. People would say that to me, well, what about you? What do you think about having one? Well, I wouldn't like one 100 yards away or as close as Mr. Allender does. But we have got one in the field about 750 yards away, which is about to be upgraded. And it doesn't attract any attention because it's in a field and it's surrounded by trees. And you really have to sort of hunt it out to see it in the locality because it is not visible from houses and not visible from the road. It's the visual intrusion that people object to, although there are undoubtedly health concerns which remain unproven. The mast adds to the street clutter on site already, and we have responsibility as councillors, I feel, not to impose further clutter on streets, etc., where people are sitting in their houses and looking out over something that is frankly bloody horrible. You can and should say no to this sort of application. We should not add to the clutter on the street because it's an easy option for the applicant. We should say that they should go away and find a more appropriate site. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councillor Matthews.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee. There is a bit of background that I'd like you to bear with me for just a minute, because when this original application came in, as the officers explained, it wasn't for this site. This site wasn't even on the radar at that point. It was to go on the corner of Long Empress and Trafalgar Road. They decided that wasn't suitable. So instead of coming back and saying that isn't suitable, we need to go back for planning, we need to speak to the planning people and see what their reaction is to this, they went ahead and did it. They turned up 6 o'clock of an evening and they were there until gone 11 with floodlights on the houses. So people opposite couldn't go to bed, there was drills going, it was a nightmare. But this was total contempt of the residents. No thought at all had been given to what those poor people had to put up with. They opened the door and there it is. The installation was in the wrong location, and that's something that I'd like you please to keep in your mind when you make your decision. There are, I understand, only 3 reasons that an application can be turned down. The impact on the visual amenity of the area, and I think that's been demonstrated fully to you this afternoon. The insufficient analysis of other sites. Now, there are other sites within the locality that could have been considered, but just weren't. There are the health implications as indicated by others, but we have a list here, or I have a list rather, of different councils that have turned down these planning applications. One planning authority has turned down 11 applications, one after the other, on these grounds. So if this is turned down, we're not going to be breaking any new ground. We're just joining in with them and agreeing that these people are coming in because there's an expectation that this will go through planning. Everybody's going to rubber stamp it, and we need to show that there needs to be some thought going behind these decisions before they come to us, so that as a committee we're not put in this position. Our officers are able to guide them where these places should be located and how they should be located. Saying this is going to be 20 metres high, okay, that's fine. But the guideline says that it's got to be twice the distance from a house. Now, you heard the officer say it's 30 metres from the nearest residence. It should actually be 40. So on the grounds of that alone, we would need to look at that and really sort of think about these things, because they really are interesting, and they are what really you are making the decision on what people have got to live with forever. So I just agree with everybody that this is something that we need the council to agree to turn down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally then, Councillor Pugh, please.
Sorry about that. My phone's off, and that was a Teams thing trying to get hold of me, so I do apologise. Thank you to everyone for coming today, and thanks committee for hearing us. I know that everybody have said a lot of things, but my main objection here is this retrospective planning, this decision, because when they first came, people were so upset and traumatized. They were literally in the ditch, trying to stop them from doing it, and they went away. They deliberately came back late in the night to not have the objections around. So make no mistake, these aren't played fair at all. Do you know what I mean? And you know, my big fear is we know these are going up. We know they got to go up everywhere. We've already got a number in the ward and things like that. You know, but this attitude of, oh well, we decided we couldn't put it there for whatever reason, so we'll just put it where we want to. If you start allowing that to happen, then it could be outside everybody's house, wherever. They'll just put them wherever. And I have to say, the photos do not do this thing justice at all. Let me assure you, it's a huge thing. And they may have a camera based on it, but they've done nothing about that graffiti on it. Our boys have been clearing some of these posts, and they're not even ours. Do you know what I mean? So you know, they've got a huge industrial area behind. Why on earth is it on a main road? Do you know what I mean? You know, Mr. Allender here, who has lived perhaps all his married life there. I know we're not legally entitled to views and things like that, but he can look out of his front window, and perhaps for the last 40, 50 years, sorry, Robert, I might have aged you then. Do you know what I mean? Has watched that sun go down in the night. Now, there's no sunset. There's just this big, huge pole. Do you know what I mean? And that is important to people. You know, we just had COVID. We've all been stuck in. We know how hard it is. The older you get, if you're a bit more in the house than usual, you know, and I just think that it's really shockingly underhand, this behaviour, and the council needs to stop it. Otherwise, it will continue to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lewis, first hand up. Thank you.
Yes, question what Alien is. If we were to reject this proposal today, would the mast then be moved to its original site, which was, I believe, say about 5 meters away? And would they have? Would there be no objection to putting it there, because there would be no? I assume they've got planning permission for that particular site. Would it just be a case of them moving it from there to the original site, which they had permission for?
Yes.
Am I right there?
Sorry, Ian, are you able to show on the presentation slide number 7? the street scene without the mast. There you go. Okay, so that's the image of the grass verge before the mast was erected. What was approved earlier this year was a mast that was closer to the lamp post that's on the right-hand side of that image. Are you able to move 2 slides forward? That's where the mast is now. They have effectively got permission to put that mast in the vicinity of where I suggested on the earlier slide. That is something that it's within their gift to do so. I can't say for 100% certain why it hadn't been installed there, but I suspect that there would have been some sort of a technological reason, such as utilities or something like that below ground, but I cannot say why. I can only be objective and assess what's the facts that's before me. What's before you as a planning committee is what the key question I would be asking if I was in your shoes is, if the authority has approved something in the vicinity that's about 10 or 12 meters away, what grounds do you have to refuse the scheme that's before you? Is there such a material difference between what is 10 to 12 meters away, which I suggested on the screen, compared to it is now? That is essentially what's before you. And I've listened to the public here, and I have to say, you know, I can understand some of the sympathy that I've got with how the process has led with what's happened, the mast being positioned in the wrong side. But we as the planning department, we just look at it as objective and as factual as possible.
No, sorry.
And we've assessed
Sorry,
it. We've assessed it on its own merits, but in context, it all comes down to the question. There has been an approval that's about 10, 12 meters away from that mast. What is the material difference before you? So I hope I've answered your question there.
Very sorry. This just thank you, Eileen. It's just one opportunity to speak. Councillor Lewis.
This reminds me, I had many of these masts in Gower over a period of time. We objected to every one, and it all went to the Welsh Assembly, and surprise, the Welsh Assembly gave it the thumbs up. And I think actually if this goes to the Welsh Assembly, it's going to be exactly the same. And I just think that I can understand people don't want a pole in front of them. These things would happen. I got one in my front, I got one in my back, so I'm not too worried. But as I say, I must sort of confess, I'm probably the only one sitting here who doesn't have a mobile phone. I haven't got one.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, folks. Councillor Keaton.
Yeah, I think we lost a battle with these masts when we did start all using mobile phones. I agree there, but what I'm annoyed at is the underhand way they seem to have gone about it. That's the thing that's dodgy. I mean, the retrospective planning, the normal person on the street, if they'd done something like this, they'd be told take it down. You were told to put it there, not here. It would have been very specific. You know, I know that. I've gone through planning with a house. So I just feel like they do deserve a slap on the wrist for this. And to say, no, you can't get away with that. You've got to be more specific. When you're going to put one of these things up, you've got to follow the rules. And you can't just come in the middle of the night and put it up where it's not expected to be. It's crazy. Otherwise, sitting around for planning doesn't make a difference, does it? It's no point to it. And yeah, I suppose the Welsh Assembly would probably say, oh, well, it's only that far away. But I think we should make a stand on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor White, and then I got Councillor Black.
Yes, as I say, these are obviously going to be coming to us quite often, and we've had others before. I would like to know if we are able to inform these people with these mast companies that they should consult with the local members first before deciding sites, because it looks as if they just come in without giving any total information to local members. Local members represent the areas, and we know the layout of our wards. So I don't know whether through a legal officer can advise if we can put process in place that the mass providers, that when they go out into end communities, that they is a legal duty on them that they must consult with the local members on the sites that they are looking at.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Black.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we're all very upset about the fact that people come in and put these things in without planning permission and then come back and ask for it to be approved retrospectively. Unfortunately, we as a planning committee have to determine the application in front of us, irrespective of whether it's up already or hasn't been or is about to be put up. And you know, I think it was reference to the ordinary person in the street. If we turn it down today, we'll tell them to take it down. But the problem we have is not only would there be an appeal to the Welsh Government in terms of, well, it's only 12 metres or so from where one's already been approved, but we'd also then have to have an enforcement notice, which could also be challenged to the inspectorate. And they was and until that enforcement notice is upheld, they would leave the mast up there. And I think the chances of that enforcement notice being upheld is fairly remote as well. So effectively, we're stuck with the mast there, and we're not going to be in a position to take it down. I just wanted to ask, Chair, reference was made to health issues and the precautionary principle. I just wondered if the officer could address those in the response. I think it's important that people understand the position of members of the planning committee in relation to that particular issue in regard to 5G masts. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I sympathise with the residents and the local members because this isn't where it should have been. Whether the residents were expecting it to go in a certain place and then all of a sudden it's not there. But the thing that it doesn't tickle me because it's not very funny either. But on condition 3, when it says that after the requirement of this is passed, then it is to be removed from where it is. And the reason, which can be explained to me, the reason in the interest of visual and general amenities. So you're saying in the condition that when they finish with it, there is a visual and general amenity being affected by this pole, but not in the planning condition, the planning application. Maybe wrong wording was put on the reason for that.
I'll just respond to that point, and I think Ian will come in. Any condition that we put down has to have a reason. I think the report is quite honest. It says it does have a localised impact, but not on an amenity factor to such an extent that we would, say it's unacceptable. I think in most circumstances, a 20-metre high mast, if you had a choice with or without it, you'd probably say without it. But the purpose of that is when it becomes redundant, it's no longer justified to be in that location. So its removal is important in the interest of visual amenity. In 10, 15 years, we might be on 6G, 7G. What are the telecommunications demands for those type of things? It may involve more masts, taller masts, less masts. We just don't know. What we can control is the development that's before you. And when that mast becomes redundant for its needs, we would want it removed because we acknowledge in the report that it has a localized impact. And at the moment, the mast is justified in being there because it fulfills a purpose. It's there sending signal, it's for people's benefit. If it's no longer required, then it no longer needs to be there. So that's the reason for the condition and the justification that's been provided. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to come in on the retrospective applications, which I think Councillor Black has probably dealt with generally, but just to confirm, it's not illegal to carry out development without planning permission. Whilst it's unauthorised development, we have to consider it as if it hasn't taken place. So the fact it's been done, we can't put any weight on that in terms of determining the application. And again, as has been mentioned previously, the key issue really is what is the difference between what has approval and what is before you today. And if
committee was minded to refuse the application, essentially they would have to demonstrate why this location is unacceptable, whereas 10, 12 metres away was, has planning permission and is acceptable. In terms of notification of ward members, and Councillor White touched on that, there's no legal requirement to notify ward members, but companies do work under a code of good practice, and they should, as part of that code of good practice, notify members. I don't know what happened on this particular application, but I was emailed this morning in connection with another site in the city and county where the ward member has had notification and been consulted. So it could be different companies operate differently, but some companies do it, but it's a code of good practice rather than a legal requirement. No, it's got to be in legislation, and there's nothing in legislation.
Yeah, sorry, thank you, Councillor. Yes, there's a section on page 13. Now then, Planning Policy Wales, the latest edition is 2021, I believe. So it's quite as up to date as we've got on Planning Policy Wales as to how we assess health related issues. So it's page 12, sorry, not page 13. And there are quotations in there which makes it clear how we acknowledge on one hand that health is a consideration, it is a material planning consideration, but the scope of that is quite narrow when it comes to telecommunications. And in particular, the guidelines that we have from the policy, as it says that if it meets a certain national guidelines, which is called the ICNIRP and is referred by one of the residents here as well, that as long as it complies to that, there are no other health related issues that are significant enough to warrant a refusal of such a proposal. And I think the Planning Policy Wales goes a bit further as well, is that it is a precautionary approach to it, and local authorities should not implement their own precautionary policies, such as banning things and whatever it is. We've got to follow the advice, we've got to follow the facts that's before us. And Planning Policy Wales, which is the latest edition, which was published just less than 2 years ago, or about 2 years ago, it's saying us that provided that this has got that certification, that is acceptable in health terms. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to add one further point as well regarding that, if members were inclined to refuse the application, then there is a possibility the council could be subject to a costs award if the appeal, if the developers appealed, and that is a material consideration for members to consider as well. Thank you, Chair.
Beg your pardon. Yeah, I got no other members wishing to speak, are there? No. And so if that's the case, then we can. Oh, Councillor Tribe, sorry. It's only the committee speaking. Oh, thank you. Okay, Mark. We only received a list of speakers who then can speak. Yeah. 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 Well, if you would let Councillor Tribe speak, and then we can let you back in. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Tribe. Can do. Yeah, if you would, before that, we get legal advice on the protocol. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The council's constitution sets out the speakers' rights protocol. So that's the advert went on the website. So speakers have a combined 5 minutes. The chair does have discretion, and I think the speaker spoke more than for 5 minutes earlier on. But but they said the rules are set out in the council's constitution about speakers.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have to follow a legal constitution. But anyway, thank you. Councillor Tribe first.
Good afternoon, all. I represent two areas, Llangefelig and Velindre. Velindre has got more than its fair share of ugly structures, i.e. the wind turbines. But fortunately for the residents of Velindre, they're hundreds and thousands of yards away from these sites. This is in the middle of an urban area. There has to be somewhere more appropriate to build that. Behind, well, I think I know the area, you've got the halfway pub on the main road. Behind there, as memory serves me correctly, you have a green belt countryside there. Possibly, it's just an idea, but there's got to be a more appropriate area to install these. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, I've already had to remind others of the protocol of this meeting, yeah, which I will now, but we will allow the speaker to come back in. Thank you.
The eldest person here today. I'm nearly 91. And I praise God and thank him for it. As I've been listening to you all, very interesting, but I want to say this, that if this goes through, and it's a big if, I want it to be a big if, but I'm praying that it doesn't. But if it does go through, what is Swansea going to be like? What are we going to be like when we are being controlled? And that's what's happening today. We are being controlled. We've heard this afternoon everything that has been said. It should never be there. I know that. It should never be there. And it's so near. And everyone has said all what has been said to say about it. And yet, to me, as I'm listening here, over so many heads, it seems to be going just over the heads. My prayer is that God will intervene and that this mast will not come to us. Yes, there are places, and as that gentleman just said, he said the area there, that it could be not there. Why? That's the word, isn't it? Why? Why has it been put right there? But I was told that even if it was put up, it wouldn't be too good because of the trees. The trees will have an effect on it. That's what I've been told. So I'm just saying to you, I want to thank you. I've listened to you and I thank you for meeting you all. And my prayer is that you will all see reason and see with understanding what it might come to you. Not only me and each of us, just a few of us that have come today, but it could be, and it may not be just that. And as that gentleman said, stronger masts. But I've been told that this mast, the area of this mast, is not as wide as the G4. The G4 goes out, but this G5 is in, and that's why we'll be overrun by them. If you don't reason and stop, you have the authority. You're our councillors. I thank God for you. And I do pray for the council every day. And my prayer is that you will understand and that we will not have this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right, okay, then we can now move to the vote on this matter, and the recommendation you see on page 14 is to approve. So Gareth, would you?
Yeah, councillor Peter Black. For. Phil Downing. For. Alan Jeffrey.
For.
Mary Jones.
For.
Sarah Keaton.
For.
Mike Lewis.
For.
Richard Lewis. Nicola Matthews.
Yeah.
For.
Nicola Matthews.
For.
Mark Tribe.
Against.
Mike White. For. Andrew Williams.
For.
Paul Lloyd.
And 4.
It's 11 for 1 abstention. Chair. Oh no, 10 for 1 against 1
Yeah,
abstention.
thank you very much. Have we now, thank you, Gareth, and that's carried. Can we now move on to the next item, please? Item 2, and that's the land of south of Fabian Way. When you're ready, please. James.
And that's what he found. Right? So we've got the two in the pools.
Thank you.
Taking the legislation.
Of course.
Well, why are we taking religious? That's why I'm talking off representing people and sticking for Apple. Why are you not representing? That's what I want to know. We are paying your wages. But yes, we are. Sit there and nod your head.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
But when I put extension or do something, I will not take them. Okay, I'm there to see what you say. I will fetch that then. Why do you let?
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, David. Can we move on to next item, then, which is item 2.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, second item, plot D5B. So to remind members, this application was deferred from the committee on the 7th of March 2023 to allow further consideration of the highways issues and for committee site visit, which happened this morning. So hopefully members would have had benefit from the site visit. So since then, further drawings have been submitted, making changes to the access, which we'll highlight, and the parking layout. Together, more information on highways and a framework parking management plan as well. So different additional drawings, documents in respect to highways notes were received later on in August, and following the meeting with highways, highway comments have been revised and now have no highway objection to the proposal, which we'll come on to in a minute. So, as you can see on the screen, we have the development plot D5B, which is the sort of the grey area next to the building, which is referred to as D5. It's on the northern side there of Prince of Wales Dock. The green area to the east is the proposed area for the park, and there's a further development plot right at the end of the plot on the eastern side. So it's, say, bordered to the south by the promenade along Prince of Wales Dock, and then obviously by Langdon Road to the north. And then you've got the idea. You can see the various other developments in the background there. You've got the Village Hotel, and then the residential development to the west, and immediately on the other side, Langdon Road, and then the sort of townhouse courtyard development, which goes further along Langdon Road to the east of the site. So next slide, please, Ian. So so this members who went to the site visit this morning would obviously recognise this photo. This is where we stood on Langdon Road. And you can see obviously the various contexts of the site. So the building in the background is plot D5, which is a coastal residential block, and then you can just see Prince of Wales Dock in the background as well. And the development site effectively is the site behind the red hoarding. And the next slide, please. Right. Okay. So the history to this site, obviously, it's a reserve matters application, which means that there is an outline planning permission in place for the SA1. Linked to that, there is the master plan, which is the image in front of you, which obviously allocates the site for residential development. And then the next slide, Ian, which is part of the master plan, which basically is land use and indicative heights as well. So in terms of allocate land use, obviously the site is allocated for residential use and it has an indicative maximum scale of 5 stories. So in that context, the scale land use is appropriate for the site and in accordance with the outline permission. So in terms of placemaking guidance, if we move on, Ian, please. Yes, obviously this is the site as we outlined this morning. So as you've seen this before, so obviously it's single access coming out onto Langdon Road. It's a sort of horseshoe type development. As they got the grey building is D5, the existing building to the east, the left, to west, sorry. And then you've got the courtyard development with strong development on 3 frontages. The buildings next to the grey block are townhouses. So you've got 8 townhouses and then the residential block, apartment block, 5 stories, which is facing on turns the corner, as it were, fronts onto Langdon Road, fronts onto the proposed park, and then obviously overlooks the Prince of Wales Dock. So obviously the layout is in accordance with most of the development blocks in SA1, which have this strategy designed with strong frontages around courtyards, with a benefiting from waterfront locations, basically along the promenade on Prince of Wales Dock. So the general layout concept is designed to respond to this approved form and context along Langdon Road. And it's obviously being outlined and assessed in accordance with our council's placemaking guidelines, and that's obviously highlighted in the report. So the elevations, as you can see, have come up on the screen. So obviously you can see the townhouses, the 3-story, and then you've got the residential block, 5 stories. So as I said, outlined, the layout will create quite active frontage to the east end of the adjacent and the future public park. 3 to 5 story scale, which accords with the master plan and appropriate for the location and the surrounding context. External finishes will have a robust brick, and we'll reference obviously some of the historic SA1 buildings such as the J Shed, Ice House, etc., which has obviously the historic red brick as a principal material. And projecting balconies, and we'll have large windows which sort of reflect that sort of warehouse character which some of the other developments in SA1 have attempted to achieve. So all 43 homes will have access to private amenity space with townhouses out on small dockside terraces, which are slightly raised above the walkway, which replicates some of the other developments in this location. And then the apartment blocks then will basically use usable balcony areas and a communal roof space as well. So the block has been designed, obviously you've got the block next door to it, so obviously it's been designed to minimise overlooking from the adjacent block, which obviously, as you saw this morning, had balconies basically on its eastern elevation, overlooking the site, but that will overlook the internal car parking area. So obviously to minimise any loss of light, etc., from those properties. So we have had objections which are outlined in the report. Some additional objections are outlined on the update sheet as well, you will note. Some of these are in respect of neighbouring amenities, scale of the development, as I say. But the development is in accordance with the master plan and is appropriate in the context, obviously, to the block to the west of the site. and to the other townhouses in along Langdon Road. So in that respect, obviously, it's considered appropriate and meets our placemaking guidance. So as I said, the application was deferred from our last committee because of concerns about highway safety and the parking element. And since then, we've had the additional information. Access has been improved. We've got a 4.95 metre wide access going into the courtyard. We've got 2 metre pavement on either side of the courtyard. The refuse storage is on Langdon Road, which makes it easy for vehicle access for refuse vehicles to pick up. And in that respect, as I say, highways are now happy with the revised layout and have got no objection to the scheme. Concerns have been expressed about the parking. As I say, it's got 43 units. We have parking provision of 29 spaces, but obviously the argument is made obviously in terms of Future Wales PPW guidance that makes a reduction in parking in sustainable locations. This is considered to be a sustainable location. It's in a walkable neighbourhood within SA1. We've got a number of facilities in SA1 and public transport along Fabian Way and access into the city centre as well. So I think in that context, the justification for a lower parking requirement in this case is justified. As I mentioned, we have got a framework management plan in place with POBO, who will manage the facility, and obviously they will only allocate space permits to number of the units, obviously 29 spaces, so 29 permits. And obviously it'll be on the basis that some people won't need access to the car, having regard to a sustainable location. So in that context, I think it is controllable. You will see this morning, obviously, Langdon Road is subject to a TRO, which manages or basically enforces or prevents any on-street parking along Langdon Road, and therefore on-street parking doesn't occur, and there's no highway safety issues. So in this respect, obviously it's considered to be acceptable, and obviously it is recommended for approval, and it's subject to the 106 as previously, with 10% affordable housing. As I said last time, it's POBL are obviously an RSL. They will provide more than 10%, but obviously the 10% is in accordance with the SA1 obligation and also the development plan policy as well. So it'll provide good quality affordable housing in a sustainable location, and as I say, recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. I got, let me see, excuse me. Tracy Thomas, is Tracy with us online? Yep, thank you. You've got your 5 minutes to address the committee.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the residents. So first of all, I'd like to talk about the relevant planning history here. Outline permission on 2015/1584 states the land use master plan shall be reviewed, submitted to and approved in writing to the local planning authority every 2 years. Mr. Owen confirmed that the land use master plan had not been reviewed since 2015. Therefore, the master plan is no longer valid and no planning application related to it, like this one, should be approved. This also means that the application can no longer be considered a reserved matter and should be considered as a new application in principle. It also seems likely that any planning approval issued in relation to the master plan since 2017 is now unsafe and potentially open to legal challenge. This was raised at the last meeting, but has not been minuted, acknowledged, or addressed in this latest report. Going on to the next area is parking. The fact that the development only provides 29 spaces for 43 dwellings is against a CCS parking standard requirement of 60, has still not been adequately addressed. The excuses, the mitigation and plans offered are irrelevant to the standard and will only cause friction among its residents. The report claims on page 39 that a lower standard of parking for such development is acknowledged in the county parking standards. It is not. Also, the parking standard clearly states visitors parking must be designated as an integral part of any development which is required and must take into account the needs of disabled people. This site has no visitor space. No councillor, I'm sure, who enjoys the benefit of their own parking space at home should expect any of their residents to accept a lower standard purely because they have a need for social housing. In such a tiny plot, there's obviously only room for 29 parking spaces, but the development of 43 dwellings clearly seeks to maximise income for pobl and places commercial interests ahead of the residents' amenity and quality of life, and in breach of the Future Generations Wales Act 2015 and the Human Rights Act. The obvious solution would be to reduce the scale of the development so that it can meet the CCS parking standards. An example, a development solely comprised of the 3-storey townhouses in line with the other neighbouring developers in Emily Court and further along Langdon Road would satisfy this. If, as 5 stories only indicated in the 2015 master plan, which has been shown to be invalid, this should not be an issue from a planning perspective. Just going on to the Future Generation Wales Act and the Human Rights Act. The proposed development potentially breaches both acts. It is particularly relevant as Swansea has declared itself the Wales' first human rights city since the last time this proposal was discussed. Just to summarise for the potential breaches, Future Generation Wales Act, the Prosperous Wales, denying residents access to vehicles limits their ability to access decent work. Healthier Wales, lack of visitor space makes visits by family, friends, carers, etc. difficult, leading to isolation, affecting mental well-being. More Equal Wales, discrimination on the basis of social economic background is prohibited. Thus, a reduction in parking standard is unacceptable. Cohesive communities, segregating residents by denying some parking spaces at the expense of others risks internal friction and dispute. The lack of car in Wales also limits residents' ability to fully engage in the wider community. In terms of human rights acts, the right to peaceful enjoyment of your property, this will be severely reduced by existing neighbouring residents due to noise, dirt, dust, increase in traffic, overlooking and lack of privacy, and potentially reduced property values. This is one legal definition of a reduced enjoyment of property. The right to family life, the lack of visitors parking will potentially severely restrict this. And discrimination is not allowed on the basis of social origin, again, reducing the parking standard below the CCS requirement for social housing is discriminatory. Using Harbour Quays as a precedent is irrelevant here. It predates the Future Wales Act and Swansea's status as a human rights city. In any case, there are many issues resulting from the lack of parking here. And my last point is local amenities. The report continually suggests that the development is in with easy walking access of a local shop and healthcare, and even suggested it could be part of an expanding city core. However, currently it is not in the city core, and a council employee cannot make this decision. The health centre has 2 doctor surgeries and a pharmacy, are all struggling to cope with the existing demand, with the pharmacy often closed in walk-in prescriptions, mean the nearest one is a long way across Fabian Way and across the dual carriageway. This is not easy for people, for elderly or infirm people. The report continually refers to the excellent public transport in the area. This is not the case. In fact, they can't even recruit enough drivers to maintain the sparse service that we currently have here. Therefore, a car is essential for most people in Swansea. Thank you for letting me speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have the agents to address this. Laura Faber, please.
Thank you.
You have your 5 minutes as well.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. My name is Laura Fowler, agent on behalf of the applicant. The recommendation before you is, of course, one of approval. As you will recall, an application for the proposed development was deferred from committee in March solely to allow further consideration of highways issues. The applicant has engaged with highways officers and scheme amendments have been made in order to address the issues raised. Comments have subsequently been received from highways which confirm no objection to the proposals subject to condition. In respect of parking, the applicant has submitted a framework parking management plan which outlines how parking will be controlled by Pobble during the lifetime of the development. Furthermore, as noted by your highways officers in their latest consultation response, Langdon Road is well protected by traffic regulation orders and therefore overspill parking is unlikely to be an issue. As such, and on balance, there are not considered to be any highway safety issues arising from the development. It is also important to highlight that all other statutory and specialist bodies and consultees have conveyed their support for the proposals and that the application is recommended for approval by your officers. Notably, the Housing Enabling Officer has conveyed full support for the scheme, which will provide much needed affordable housing and will make a valuable contribution to the identified housing need in the plan period. The scheme will provide general needs affordable housing, which will be DQR compliant. Moreover, the development has been designed to comply with lifetime home standards, the concept of which is based on 5 overarching principles: inclusivity, accessibility, adaptability, sustainability, and good value. As such, all of the townhouses and apartments will be adaptable to meet the changing needs and circumstances of individuals. The scheme represents a high-quality development which responds to the site and its context within the SA1 development area. The design of the development protects neighbouring amenity as well as ensuring appropriate residential amenity for future occupiers. Each apartment and townhouse has private amenity space and access is provided to the adjacent park. The site relates well with its surroundings through its active frontages and architectural references to the industrial heritage of the area. Soft landscaping and SUDs are integrated into the proposals, providing a significant betterment in terms of the site's contribution to the green infrastructure network and placemaking. Indeed, your placemaking and heritage officer deems all aspects of the proposals acceptable and recommends approval accordingly. The recommendations of the Designing Out Crime Officer have been incorporated into the scheme, with a view to the development achieving the Secure by Design Gold Award. In addition, officers have commended the highly sustainable design of the proposals, which complies with Pobble's net zero carbon plan to address fuel poverty and carbon reduction. The scheme has also been presented to the expert and impartial Design Commission for Wales panel. The scheme was well received by the panel and the feedback provided has informed the final design proposals. It should of course be appreciated that this is a reserve matters application, which seeks approval for the detail of a scheme benefiting from outline planning permission and also being located within settlement limits. To conclude, and consistent with your officer's comprehensive and detailed assessment and conclusions, and now that the sole issue of highways has been fully resolved, the development is considered to be wholly policy compliant. I therefore respectfully urge you to approve the reserve matters and discharge of conditions accordingly, in line with the recommendation of officers. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Locke, you were going to speak on behalf of the ward member. Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Right, my name is Councillor Michael Locke and I'm speaking on behalf of Councillor Sam Bennett. So I'm reading out a prepared text from Councillor Sam Bennett. Thank you members for your time and consideration, and I would like to apologise for not being able to attend in person due to other commitments this afternoon. Since the committee last considered the application, there have been a number of clarifications made. However, the overwhelming concern of residents remains the lack of parking and the height of the development. The planning documents make the assertion that this development is similar to that of Harbour Quay. Yet, Harbour Quay, due to its position, cannot be regarded as similar as it is not in front of existing homes. It is in front of offices and commercial units. As such,
Referencing this height as a justification for the height of this development should not be regarded as similar. Reference is made to the data from the last census. However, the output area, according to the ONS, in both 2011 and 2021, clearly shows that properties with access to a car at 67.4 to 61.5%. The output area covers Harbour Quay and Llys Haven, both of which are social housing. I feel that the 2021 census data leaves the assertion that social housing has lower car ownership unsound. Whilst true, it is not as low as to justify less than half the amount of parking vis-à-vis our policies. The single most glaring contradiction in this report is the suggestion that the development does not need as much parking, whilst simultaneously stating that ad hoc parking on Lansdowne Road could also relieve any parking issues. The report then further contradicts itself on page 25 by stating Lansdowne Road is protected by the traffic regulation orders, so on-street parking should not be an issue. All these statements cannot be true at the same time. The application either foresees a parking issue and wants to make as yet unavailable on-street parking a solution, or there is adequate parking in the development. We have already had a number of applications or buildings in the area with fewer parking spaces and homes. When considering this application, I would ask the Planning Committee consider the accumulative impact of poor parking provision and learn lessons from elsewhere in the city where parking is an issue that inevitably costs the authority in the end through enforcement or new traffic regulation orders. Non-existent on-street parking on Lansdowne Road cannot be the solution every time. I am concerned that we are choosing to ignore our own supplementary planning guidance on page 23. This is quoted as, "At no time can parking drop below 1 space per unit. We either have planning policies and guidance to follow or not." I appreciate that we are going to look at this policy and the city centre, but we have not yet, and this community is not currently in the city centre core. Cherry-picking policies to follow is an unsound precedent to set and will contradict decisions when we choose to apply this policy. In summary, we are not following our own planning guidance and cherry-picking to fit this application. There is an accumulative impact on under-provision of parking. Lansdowne Road cannot both be a solution to inadequate parking and protected by a TRO. 2011 and 2021 census data shows significantly higher levels of car ownership in the output area than being referenced, and that completes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, then. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Jones first, then.
Thank you. And I remember asking this question at the previous meeting about the parking, but actually about disabled parking, because I actually can't find it in this report at all, how many spaces there are for disabled. And I think if I remember correctly last time, they weren't really accessible because they were pushed in the corner at the bottom of a ramp. So I would like clarification on that. And also on page 38, it's saying about car parking, sorry again, about visitor spaces, and it says parking with applying permission to sorry, there's something about individual plots, and they should provide general parking on strategic locally located plots. Sorry, I can't get my words out. Page 38 at the very bottom, this is. So it doesn't seem to me that we're actually addressing the car parking, sorry. We've looked at the amended thing from Highways and say, oh, they agree it's okay, but it isn't, because we're not actually adhering to what we have said in the car parking guidance, because the cumulative impact is very important. I mean, you go along there and there is nowhere to park unless you can actually park within the area that you are living or working or whatever. You just can't park. You know, you've got the bay and all those kind of buildings. You've got the clinic. You've got an orthodontist not far. If you can't get in their car parks, you've got a really long walk. So it is a major issue for the residents around there, and I don't really think it's been addressed. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you. I also have concerns about the parking situation here. I mean, I know the area reasonably well. Langdon Road is impossible. You can't park on it because it's basically a restricted area and it's very heavily patrolled. So anybody who parks there is likely to get booked. So that's not available to residents. My understanding, my memory of the traffic of the guidance, I haven't looked it up recently, it's 1 parking space per unit plus 1 parking space for every 5 units for visitors. So in theory, there should be, you know, well, most probably nearly 50 parking spaces on this site for the 43 units which are there. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And I do have concerns because, you know, whereas you might say you get away with 1 development and say you had 64% occupancy, that's about 28 spaces in this place, which is still more than is actually being provided. You have no vista parking. The disabled spaces appear to be tucked away and out of sight. And it just seems to me that this just adds to the whole problem of the area in terms of other developments have been approved on similar basis. Residents are struggling to find somewhere to park, and there are not enough spaces for them to do so. So my concern is that this development is not being properly provided for in terms of parking, and that's going to have a detrimental effect on the whole of the SA1 area.
Any other members? No. Sure. Okay. David, there was a few.
Okay, so on the parking, so yes, sorry, disabled parking first off. If you can you put up the site plan in, please? So yeah, sorry, the 29 spaces, there is an allocated disabled parking bay. It's there basically in the right-hand corner, or the top right-hand corner. So there is provision within the layout for that. So, okay, just to clarify about Langdon Road, yes, there is a TRO in place. And just to clarify, there is, as part of this proposal, there is no proposal to amend that to allow on-street parking at all. The TRO will stay in place to enforce against on-street parking, to allow Langdon Road to stay car-free, to allow the free flow of traffic, obviously. So yes, we have obviously assessed this against the parking guidelines. The parking guidelines obviously date from 2012. I've outlined this in the report. So they obviously precede the local development plan, and they also precede Future Wales, which is part of the development plan for Wales, and also the guidance in PPW. So there is an argument, obviously, that the parking guidelines don't reflect the existing development plan policy, and therefore they are open to interpretation in an evolving planning context. So which obviously encourage this type of development in a sustainable location. It is regarded as being sustainable. There are facilities. It is within walking distance of facilities in the city centre, and I would disagree that this isn't a walkable neighbourhood, because I think it is. So I think there is a justification in this instance to allow less than one-to-one parking. In terms of strategic parking, what that's referring to, in SA1, obviously, it's a mixed development. We've got a number of residential developments. We've got employment offices and leisure opportunities as well. So the way it works, obviously, you've got on-site parking for some of the facilities. Some of the other buildings, such as J Shed, don't have their parking, and they rely therefore on the general SA1 visitor parking. So obviously at the minute you've got temporary car parks on a number of the development plots, including the site next to the Norwegian Church, and also the site which is referred to sometimes the Coda site, which is to the west of this development. So that is a development site in the future, albeit half of it temporary works as a visitor car park at the minute. The long-term solution in SE1, there are designated space plots for long-term permanent parking. So obviously, if you can't get a visitor to SE1 and you can't park on a plot, there are alternative car parking areas available, and they will be to the south of SE1 and also to the north of SE1. There's a plot A9, which is basically behind the Admiral building, which will act as a permanent car parking. As I say, those temporary car parks that hopefully in time will be developed out, but that remains to be seen. So Matt, do you want to come in on highways issues at this point?
Yeah. Oh, thank you, David. I think you've summed them up pretty succinctly, actually. I think it's when looking at the quantum of parking given, as Dave said, the SPG is quite old now, and current policy is much more recent than it, and therefore it reduces the weight in which you need to consider the SPG. We have also had inspector decisions that have gone against us when we've looked at parking levels. I think it's not sufficient. I couldn't sustain an objection, I don't think, based on low parking. You'd have to demonstrate why that causes a highway safety issue. And in an area like SA1, where the main roads are covered in TROs, they are enforced, and there is alternative parking available in paid car parks, it would be very difficult to make a case that the reduction in the level of parking is going to lead directly to a highway safety issue in an area that is sustainable. It is close to high frequency public transport on Fabian Way. It's well within recommended walking distances. It's got local facilities. Yeah, I think to my mind, it's policy compliant, and to reduce the amount of parking.
Is there anything else, David? Or? All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got to go back to the disabled. One space is a joke, I've got to say, because probably it'd be a resident that lives in it. And if you've got somebody that's disabled coming to visit you, they can't do it. You know, it's just not practical. I mean, speaking from somebody who knows how difficult it is, I think you need to really relook at this. I mean, it's the space is still stuck in the corner, and I'm sure you'll have more than one disabled person living in the flats. And where are they supposed to go? Because the other car parking spaces are very narrow, so you need to be able to open the doors fully to get in and out. So I think the parking is a joke. It's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, thanks, Chap. I had difficulty following this argument on the parking. Well, as I understand it, what you're saying is that the parking policy we have at the moment is old and therefore doesn't fit into your idea of what you want in SA1. Therefore, it's flexible. Now, can we apply that to other policies of the council as well? If we have some old policies, I mean, you know, if the policy is not suitable to the condition, then we need to change the policy. But the policy is there for us to follow. You know, we can't just discard the policy because it doesn't convenient for us in terms of a particular application. We have to follow the policy in front. And if you think the policy is not relevant, then you should bring another policy to us to approve. So, you know, I just seems to me this is a very convenient argument to try to justify what is an inadequate parking provision.
Just to provide some clarification really on the parking standards. The parking standards are guidelines, they're not policy. And they were produced at a time when the policy framework was different. It was probably the Swansea local plan at the time. We've had also the UDP and now the LDP. The LDP, the policies in the LDP are looking at reducing the requirements for parking, and that reflects national policy. Future Wales, the move is to reduce parking provision with developments. So in terms of policy, the policy requirement at the moment supports a reduction in parking where it can be justified. So the parking standards as guidance to support the policy are effectively outdated. So in applying the parking standards, we have to be careful what the policy says compared to the standards, and the policy will always take precedent. So I hope that provides some clarification on where the standards sit in relation to current policy.
So we've gone through two very long and protracted policy issues in terms of the local development plan and the unitary development plan, and we didn't update the guidance at the same time to fit in with them. I mean, that is incredible, isn't really credible, Ian, to be honest. You know, if the guidance didn't fit with the policy, we should have changed the guidance at the time. We had the opportunity when we actually discussed the policy. And, you know, I remember the meetings for LDP, UDP, they were long, they were drawn out, they were detailed. Why wasn't the guidance not brought up to date at that time to fit in with them? It just seems too convenient. I'm sorry.
Just to clarify, with all SPG, once the plan is adopted, we look at the policies. We look at the SPG, the supplementary planning guidance. This committee have had a number of reports brought over the last few months to look at policies, and the parking standards is one that will be looked at. I know highways have been looking at different issues with it. I don't know if Matt is able to confirm where we are with it, but they follow after the plan is adopted. So they don't come through the same time, because the plan has to be adopted first. And once you've got the policies, and obviously Future Wales is more recent again. So these things have to follow after the plan is adopted.
So the guidance is still in place?
It's still in place.
It's still extant?
It's still extant,
right.
But it's out. The policy takes precedent over the guidance.
Was there anything you wanted to add, or?
No, again, Ian's said it all. Only that the revised guidance is in draft form at the minute, and we'll be bringing that forward for members' consideration at some point in the next, few months, I would have thought.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got no other members wish to speak. So we can see the recommendation there again on page 47 is one to approve. So we'll take that vote now then, please.
Yeah, Councillor Peter Black.
Against.
Phil Downing. For. Alan Jeffrey.
For.
Mary Jones.
Against.
Sarah Keaton.
For.
Mike Lewis.
For.
Nicola Matthews.
For.
Mark Tribe.
Against.
Mike White. For. Andrew Williams. For. Paul Lloyd.
For.
8 for, 3 against, Chair.
Very much, that's carried. And then the final item on our agenda, you see on item 6, is for information. It's the appeal decision.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief report really to update committee on the appeal decision for Trehavod, Wenolith Road in Cocket. As committee made the decision on the application, we bring back a short report to outline what that decision was when an appeal is considered. Very brief summary. The inspector considered the two issues to be the impact on the character and appearance of the area and on the living conditions of the local community. He acknowledged both the material considerations and recognised the concerns of local residents, but he felt that in both cases the issues raised could be controlled by condition. In terms of the character of the area, the proposed use would be residential in nature, albeit a specialist use. And he considered things like the impact of lighting and how they could be controlled by condition, and that whatever use was on site, there would need to be some form of lighting. So he considered that would not have an unacceptable impact on the area. And then in terms of the behaviour of the future occupants of the development, he looked at evidence produced at the hearing regarding steps brought in place in similar developments elsewhere, how they were being operated, the proposals to manage the development, and considered that they were reasonable and wouldn't lead to an increase in crime or antisocial behaviour. So on that basis, the appeal was allowed. The appeal decision is attached, which sets out sort of a more detailed breakdown of his reasoning and the conditions attached to the planning permission. There was no application for costs as part of the appeal, and the inspector didn't award costs, which he's able to do even without an application, because he considered the grounds for refusal were reasonable. So the council had acted reasonably. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, thank you all, and thanks for this afternoon. And we'll meet again on the 3rd of October. So.
they expect to get through.
Possibly.
Expect to get on it. Yeah, no, because they planned out, they're going to turn down the deposit.
It's